For 3 years, I paid my brother's rent, his car insurance, his phone bill, and half his groceries. Every month, $1,800 left my account before I even saw it. I told myself it was temporary. He was going through a hard stretch, lost his job, going through a breakup, needed time to get back on his feet. I was the older sister. That's what you do. But the day I came home from the hospital with my newborn daughter, my brother didn't show up, didn't call, didn't text. When I finally reached him that evening, exhausted and still in pain, he said he'd been busy. Busy. I hung up the phone, looked down at my daughter's face, and made a decision I should have made 2 years earlier. 20 minutes later, I canceled every automatic transfer tied to his name. His first call came 45 minutes after that. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out when exactly I became the family ATM. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started when I was 26, 2 years out of nursing school, working at a regional hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I had a modest apartment, a used Honda, and a savings account I was genuinely proud of. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. And stability, I learned quickly, looks like a target to certain people. My brother was 23 when he moved back from Cincinnati. He'd been working in restaurant management, but the place he was at closed down, and he said he needed a few months to figure things out. My parents lived in a 2-bedroom condo with my dad's bad back and my mom's part-time work schedule, so there wasn't space for him there. He asked if he could stay with me for a month. I said yes. He stayed for 4 months and left only because he found an apartment he wanted. The problem was the security deposit. He was short $700. I covered it. That's how it started. Not with a grand demand, just a small ask at just the right moment, when I felt too guilty to say no. After the deposit, it was the first month's rent because his first paycheck from his new job wouldn't come in time. Then it was a parking ticket that would become a warrant if he didn't pay it. Then his car insurance lapsed, and he needed to reinstate it or he'd lose his job. Each thing was urgent. Each thing had consequences if I didn't step in, and each time I told myself, this is the last one. But there was always a next one. By the time I was 28, I had set up a direct transfer that went out every month on the 5th. $1,200 for his rent, $300 for his car insurance and phone, another $300 for his car insurance and phone, another $300 I kept in a kind of mental reserve for whatever new emergency he'd call about by the 15th. I had crunched the math on a napkin one night and the number made me feel sick. Over 2 years, I had given him more than $43,000. I folded the napkin and threw it away. My husband saw it before I did. We'd been dating for a year and he was careful about how he brought it up. He didn't want to push me away. But one night we were making dinner and I got a call from my brother asking for $150 for a car repair, and I walked into the bedroom to take it privately, and when I came back my husband just looked at me and said, quietly, "Does he ever ask how your week was first?" I didn't have an answer. My best friend was less careful about it. She and I had worked together at the hospital for 3 years, and she had watched the whole thing unfold. Over lunch one afternoon, she put down her fork and said, "He's not struggling. He's just decided you're cheaper than a payment plan." I told her she was being uncharitable. She raised an eyebrow and went back to eating. She didn't push. She didn't have to. The words just sat there. The thing about being used by someone you love is that it's not usually dramatic. There's no single villain speech. It's more like a slow erosion. You stop buying things you want because you're always short on the weeks after the 5th. You stop talking about your savings goals because it feels pointless. You start measuring your own emergencies by whether they're bad enough to justify spending money on yourself. I once had a crown break on a back molar and waited 4 months to fix it because I didn't want to dip into what I'd been trying to set aside for our eventual down payment on a house. Meanwhile, my brother bought a new TV, a 65-inch. He sent me a photo of it in his living room with a thumbs-up emoji. I didn't say anything. My parents knew I was helping him, but they treated it as natural. My mom would mention it casually over the phone. "Your brother's so lucky to have you. You've always been the responsible one." Like that was a compliment. My dad would sometimes add that my brother just needed a little more time to get settled. He was figuring it out. He had potential. They said it with the kind of warmth they never quite used when they talked about my work, my promotions, the fact that I'd made charge nurse before I was 30. I once told my mom I was exhausted from picking up extra shifts. She said, "Well, you're good at it, and your brother really needs the stability right now." She moved on to something else before I could respond. My husband and I got engaged in the spring. We planned a small ceremony at a botanical garden about 40 minutes outside Columbus. Just close family and friends, maybe 60 people, an outdoor dinner after. I handled most of the planning between shifts, picking out flowers and coordinating with the caterer on my lunch breaks. It was small, but it was ours, and I loved every detail of it. I called my brother 2 weeks before to confirm he was coming. He said, of course. He said he wouldn't miss it. He missed it. The morning of my wedding, he texted at 7:15. "Hey, not gonna make it today. Something came up. Congrats though?" That was it. No call. No explanation. I stared at the screen in the bridal suite, my hair half done, my maid of honor reading over my shoulder. She took the phone gently out of my hand and set it face down on the vanity. I called him. He picked up on the fourth ring and sounded annoyed, like I'd interrupted something. I asked what happened. He said it was complicated, that he'd explain later, that I should go enjoy my day. He wasn't apologetic, he just sounded inconvenienced. I told him I needed him there. He said, "Come on, don't make this a big thing." And he hung up. I sat very still for about 30 seconds. My maid of honor was watching me in the mirror. Then something shifted in my chest. Not heartbreak exactly, more like a lock turning. I picked up my phone, opened my banking app, and canceled the transfer scheduled for the 5th. Then I went and got married. My husband's vows were funny and genuine and made me cry twice. Our friends danced until the venue staff had to ask us to stop. My grandmother gave a toast that started with a recipe and somehow ended in a poem. It was a beautiful evening. And I was present for almost all of it. But there was a specific weight I kept circling back to. The specific shape of my brother's absence in the chair we'd reserved for him near the front. His name was on a little paper card, tucked into the arrangement. I looked at it while we cut the cake. The texts started the next morning. The first was at 9 a.m. "Hey, so I just noticed the transfer didn't go through. What's going on?" I didn't answer. By noon it was, "Seriously, rent is due in a few days. I need that money." By 3 it was a call, then 2 more calls, then a voicemail that started with, "I don't know what I did wrong," and ended with something I won't repeat. I called my husband over and read him the voicemail. His expression went very still. "We're not going backward," he said. That was all he said. I nodded and blocked the number for a few days just to have some quiet. Then things got more complicated. About a week after the wedding, I got a call from my mom. Her voice had that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one that meant she was about to present something unreasonable as though it were obviously reasonable. She said my brother was in a really hard spot. She said the landlord was calling. She said she hoped I'd reconsider. That family doesn't abandon each other when things get hard. I asked her when the last time was that she'd asked how my wedding went. She paused. Then she said, "You know it was a beautiful day." I asked her if she'd spoken to my brother that morning. Another pause. "He called, yes." I asked what he'd said. She wouldn't answer directly. She just kept looping back to how he needed help, how I had a stable income, how this wasn't the time to cut people off. I told her I needed to go and ended the call. That evening, my best friend came over. She sat at my kitchen table with her laptop while I filled her in. Her expression didn't change much. She'd always had a lawyer's face, calm and reading. But when I got to the voicemail, she looked up and said, "Save that." Then she told me something that stopped the air in my lungs. She'd been at a community event 2 weeks before the wedding, a fundraiser, and she'd run into my brother's girlfriend. In the course of conversation, the girlfriend mentioned that my brother had been telling people he expected to come into some money soon. He'd been saying it for months. When my friend pressed a little, the girlfriend seemed to realize she'd said something she shouldn't have and changed the subject. I felt cold. "What money?" My friend had done some quiet asking around. There was a life insurance policy. My maternal grandmother had taken one out years ago, naming me and my brother equally as beneficiaries. My grandmother was still alive, in her late 70s, living in a care facility about an hour from Columbus. No one had told me about the policy. I'd never been shown any documentation. I called my grandmother that night. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was clear and warm, the way it always was. I told her I needed to ask her something. I told her what I'd heard. There was a long pause, and then she said, very carefully, that yes, there was a policy. She'd told my parents about it years ago. She'd assumed they'd told me. They hadn't. She said it was worth $80,000, split equally between me and my brother. She said she'd named us both because she wanted us to have a start, a down payment, or school, or whatever we needed. She said my name clear and firm. I thanked her and said goodnight and sat in my kitchen for a long time. My husband found me there. I showed him what I'd written down, the policy, the amount, the fact that my parents had known and said nothing. He read it twice. Then he said, "Call your friend back." My best friend came back the next morning with coffee and her legal pad. She walked me through it carefully. She said the policy was mine by law once it paid out and there was nothing my brother could do about that portion. But she flagged something else. I needed to make sure no one had taken any action on the policy without my knowledge. No changes to beneficiaries, no loans taken against it. I called the insurance company. It took 3 days of back and forth to get a real answer. When I finally spoke to someone with access to the account, she confirmed the policy was intact, both names still listed as beneficiaries, no loans, no changes. But she mentioned, almost in passing, that there had been an inquiry on the account 8 months ago. Someone had called asking about the process for changing a beneficiary. The call had been noted, but no change had been made. I knew who had made that call. That same week, my brother showed up at my parents' house. I found out because my mom called me, her voice shaking in a different way this time, like she wasn't sure whose side to take anymore. She said he'd come over asking about the insurance policy. He'd apparently found out that I'd been asking questions. He told my parents that I was starting trouble, and that he should be entitled to more than half, given how long I'd been living comfortably on my nursing salary while he'd struggled. That phrase, living comfortably, hit me like a slap. I had given him $43,000. I had skipped dental work. I had watched him buy a new TV from money I'd transferred to cover his rent, and now I was the one living comfortably. I didn't sleep well that night. I met with my best friend the next day. I brought every record I had. 3 years of bank statements with the transfers highlighted, the voicemail from the day after my wedding, screenshots of the texts, the note I'd made from the call with the insurance company. She sat across from me and went through everything, page by page. When she finished, she said, "This is a pattern, and you can document it. The voicemail alone is something we can use if he escalates." She helped me write a letter. Not a personal one. A formal letter, drafted carefully, addressed to my brother and copied to my parents, stating that I had ceased all financial support, that I had documentation of all prior transfers, that any harassment or contact intended to intimidate would be treated as such legally. She sent it certified mail. My brother's response came 3 days later, not by mail, but in person. He drove to my apartment complex. I know because a neighbor texted me and sat in the parking lot for about an hour before leaving. I wasn't home. My husband was, and he called me from the parking lot where he'd gone to check. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge in it. "He left," he said. "But we need to document this." I filed a police report that afternoon. The officer I spoke to was matter-of-fact about it, noted the voicemail, the texts, the visit to the parking lot. He explained what would constitute harassment under Ohio law and told me what steps to take if anything escalated. Having it on record felt like drawing a line in concrete rather than sand. My mom called that night. She cried. She said she didn't understand why things had gotten to this point, why I couldn't just hope a little, why our family had to be torn apart over money. I let her talk for a while. Then I said, very calmly, "Mom, I gave him $43,000 over 3 years, and on my wedding day he sent me a text. I need you to hear those two things together. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know you've done a lot. It was the first time she'd ever said that. It didn't fix everything, but I wrote it down. The situation with the insurance policy resolved in a way I hadn't expected. A month after the formal letter, my brother called my grandmother, not me, my grandmother, and I only know this because she called me afterward, her voice a little shaken, but steady. She said he told her she should change the policy, that I had cut off the family and didn't deserve my share. My grandmother, who is 78 and was a middle school principal for 25 years, listened to him completely and then said, That's not something I'm going to do, and ended the call. Then she called me. She asked how I was doing. I told her the truth, that I was tired but okay, that I had good people around me, that I was trying to stop feeling guilty for a decision that was clearly the right one. She listened the way she always had, without interrupting. Then she said, You spent 3 years trying to save someone who wasn't drowning. You need to let yourself rest. I cried for about 20 minutes after that call. In the following weeks, I worked with my best friend to finalize the legal paper trail. My brother had not done anything that crossed into criminal territory. The attempted inquiry on the insurance policy wasn't illegal, just revealing. But we had documentation for everything. The police report, the certified letter, the saved voicemail and texts. She told me that if anything else happened, we were prepared, and I believed her. My husband and I quietly opened a new joint account at a different bank. We changed my direct deposit. We updated the contact information on every financial account I had. It felt tedious and a little paranoid, but every step felt like closing a door that had been left open for years without my noticing. The transfer on the 5th never went out again. My brother moved out of his apartment 2 months later. I heard this through my parents, who mentioned it in passing on a call that was otherwise about nothing. My mom said he'd moved in with a friend for a while. She said it carefully, like she was watching to see how I'd respond. I said I hoped he was okay. I meant it, actually, not in a way that changed anything, but genuinely, I didn't want him to be homeless. I just wasn't willing to be the reason he wasn't. My dad, to his credit, said something on that same call that surprised me. He said, You've been carrying more than your share for a long time. He didn't elaborate. He didn't apologize for not saying it sooner. But he said it, and I heard it. The insurance policy paid out 14 months later, after my grandmother passed peacefully at the care facility in March. I wasn't expecting how hard that would hit. I'd known it was coming. She'd been declining for a while, but still. My husband came with me to the service. My best friend drove up from the city. My brother was there, across the room, and we didn't speak. We didn't make a scene either. We just existed in the same space for an hour and then didn't. My share of the policy was $40,000. My husband and I put it toward the down payment on a house in a neighborhood I'd always wanted to live in. Older homes, big trees, the kind of street where people walk their dogs in the evenings. We moved in on a Saturday in June. I planted a small garden in the backyard, tomatoes and herbs mostly, the way my grandmother always had. The first night we slept there, I lay in the dark and thought about the napkin where I'd written $43,000 and then thrown it away. I thought about the molar I'd waited 4 months to fix. I thought about my brother's thumbs up emoji next to his new TV. And then I thought about my grandmother's voice on the phone. You spent 3 years trying to save someone who wasn't drowning. I finally understood what she meant. I used to believe that taking care of people was the same as loving them. I thought that if I just gave enough money, enough patience, enough second chances, the people I loved would eventually see it and love me back in the same way. That's not how it works. Some people will take everything you offer and feel entitled to more, and they'll never once turn around and ask how you're doing. Setting limits isn't the same as giving up on someone. It's recognizing that you can't pour from empty, and that your own life deserves the same care you keep extending outward. I know that now. I wrote it on a sticky note and put it on the inside of a cabinet in my new kitchen, where I'll see it every morning. It's not a lesson I loved learning, but it's mine, and I'm keeping it. There's a napkin somewhere in a landfill with $43,000 written on it in my handwriting. I did the math one night, folded it up, and threw it away because looking at it felt like something I couldn't afford to do. That's the thing about being used slowly. You protect yourself from the full picture because the full picture is unbearable while you're still in the middle of it. My brother didn't take from me in one dramatic moment. He took in increments small enough that each one felt survivable. A deposit here, an insurance payment there, a transfer that became so routine I stopped noticing it leave. And I let it happen, not because I was naive, but because I genuinely believed that generosity was its own reward, that if I just held on long enough, something would shift. That belief cost me $43,000 and a molar I waited 4 months to fix. What I've come to understand is that consequences don't always announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, and then one day they arrive all at once. My brother spent 3 years learning that I would always come through, no matter what. So he stopped showing up for conversations, for effort, for my wedding. That pattern was cause and effect, as direct as anything. What you reward, you get more of. What you accept without question, you silently teach people they can keep doing. The hardest part wasn't cutting him off. It was admitting that I'd needed my grandmother to name what I couldn't, that I'd been trying to rescue someone who had no interest in being rescued. That took something I had to build slowly, not just the courage to act, but the clarity to see the situation honestly, without softening it to make myself feel better. For a long time, I told myself he just needed more time, more support, one more month. That wasn't kindness. That was me avoiding a difficult truth because the truth required me to do something uncomfortable. When I finally did act, when I canceled that transfer from the bridal suite bathroom, when I filed the police report, when I signed my name to a certified letter and mailed it, none of it felt powerful in the way I'd imagined. It felt quiet, methodical, like sealing boxes and stacking them by the door. My best friend helped me build the paper trail not out of anger, but out of precision, because that's what the situation required. Clear thinking in a moment when everything in me wanted to either collapse or explode. And then there was my grandmother, who called me after my brother tried to pressure her, who listened to everything I said and then told me the simplest, most grounding thing: you've been trying to save someone who wasn't drowning. She didn't have to fight anyone. She just told the truth calmly and hung up the phone. That kind of steadiness, knowing what you stand for and not moving from it, is something I watched her model my whole life without understanding it until then. I think about that now when things get hard. Not every problem is mine to solve. Not every person who asks for help actually wants it. And the life I'm building, the house with the garden, the account my brother doesn't know about, the mornings where nothing is scheduled to leave my bank. That life is what's left when you finally stop subsidizing someone else's avoidance. The sticky note inside my cabinet says it plainly. I read it when I make coffee. Some mornings I need it more than others. But it's there, and it's true, and I wrote it myself.